weather is good, sort of. This year, I faced my New Year's resolution head on. The choices were many. I could have resolved to never again be politically incorrect. But that was far too demanding. I could have chosen to be more understanding of other drivers and reduce my commentary while driving. I'm sure Jane would appreciate that. But that just won't happen. I could have resolved to never again try to present facts to my conservative friends. But where is the fun in that? So I resolved not to have a New Year's resolution. The thing is, we all have these kinds of choices, whether to have a resolution, what to do for New Year's. Jane and I decided to celebrate ours last night. Went and saw Bernadette Peters. Should we go to paper or plastic? Should we go to the ball game or go to church on Sunday morning? Some of the choices we make are benign and some are ridiculous. Some impact the people around us. For instance, there was the story of three men stranded on a desert island. One day a brass lamp washed up on the shore. Well, you know what they did with the brass lamp. After all, this is a genie joke. So the genie pops out and gives the three men one wish each. The first man, without hesitation, said, "I wish I was with my wife," and poof, so he was. The second man didn't hesitate. He said, "I want to be in my hometown," and poof, so he was. The third man took his time. He thought about it, considered it, and finally he said, "Gee, I'm lonely. I want my friends back." We make choices every day. Decisions we make are dependent on the choices that we have, the choices that we can identify. The decisions that we make are just as dependent on the choices that we don't know that we have. Years ago, a man was digging a basement and he wanted to make more room for storage. Now, his house was built on a pretty steep slope, so there was a door that went directly into the basement area. And over time, he had a pile of rocks on one side of the basement door and a pile of dirt on the other side. Neighbors would come and help him. Well, one day a neighbor came over to help, and as they dug, they came upon a very large boulder. The thing was about 3 feet in diameter, and it extended about 2 feet into the area where the floor of the basement would be. It was too large to move. It was too heavy. And so the men decided that perhaps the project was not to be. About 2 weeks later, the neighbor saw a concrete truck backed up to the basement door, so he went over to see what was going on, and sure enough, they were laying a nice concrete floor in that basement. So he went in to help. And after all the concrete was in and smoothed to a fine surface, the neighbor asked the man, "So, what happened to that boulder?" "Oh," said the man, "I just dug a big old hole next to it and rolled it in." Sometimes the solution is just a matter of looking for more choices. Sometimes it is right next to the front. When I think about reading Frost's Road Not Taken, I tend to look at the choice of two roads as the penultimate choice. So let me repeat that last stanza. "Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made choice and then lived that choice throughout their lives. Some lived wondering what if. And others embraced their choice, the road that they chose, with a fervor and a tenacity that is mind-boggling in today's fluid employment environment. When Katrina slammed into the southern coastal states, I was working for the state of Utah. And to the credit of that state, Utah immediately began to make preparations to receive evacuees. And I had the opportunity to be involved in that effort. There were many things that happened that can only inspire us all, but the one that comes to mind for me very often happened the very first morning, the Sunday morning. The evacuees arrived, they were wet. Quite frankly, they didn't smell very good. Most of them, if you remember, had stayed in the stadium. They were frightened, and they came to our evacuation facility. They were given medical care and food and identity cards and so on, but all of that took time. So while we were processing everybody, the people were in bleachers in a big gymnasium, and we would try to get to the people who needed help the most first. About 3 o'clock in the morning, I noticed a priest standing by the entrance to the gymnasium. Now, he was dressed in your typical priestly black with a little white collar. He had a cane in one hand and a rosary in the other. My guess is that he was probably well into his 80s, and I'm probably being conservative with that estimation. So I went over to him, as my job demanded, and asked him what he needed or what he wanted, and he said, well, that he was a local priest, and that when he heard about the evacuees, he came right down to the center. And he wanted to help, if it was okay with the authorities. So, sure enough, it was. And he began to move from person to person very slowly. It was one of those things that you wondered how he managed to be doing this at that time in the morning. He would move from person to person. He would sit with them. He would talk with them and so on. No matter how slow age made him, it did not dampen his need to do what he had chosen to do so many years before. I later found out that the local church was just a little bit miffed at this priest because he was retired. And he had health issues. Nonetheless, there he was. And that morning they sent a car for him after the sun was up to take him back to his apartment. And I can tell you that he is a man who had chosen a road less traveled, and he had, as far as I could see, he had done what he had chosen to do all those many years before. My guess is that as far as he was concerned, there was one choice to be made that morning. He saw a need that he had chosen to fill, and he showed up, and he did that. Now, by the way, that center was something like 60 miles from downtown Salt Lake, and I found out he had an apartment downtown, and he had no car. To this day, I don't know how he got to that evacuation center. Not all of us have the opportunity to make choices that are that focused. Choices for most of us are the only choice, or the obvious choice, or perhaps the expected choice. Some people don't take the time or have the luxury to make a choice. Choices may be limited by circumstance, or poverty, or parental expectations. Many people just go where the circumstances take them. If you are lucky and willing, you do have choices. Critical choices arise because of life-changing circumstance, or they are born out of one of those seemingly insignificant choices we make every day. We all let circumstances push us in directions that we later regret. One too many drinks, a hurtful response or comment, the extra piece of pie, a lapse of temper. We all look at situations and say, I coulda, or I should. We all are victims of our choices just as much as we are the beneficiaries of them. And we are all victims and beneficiaries of other people's choices. Just as Katrina victims in those bleachers that morning were the beneficiaries of doctors and nurses and administrators and that old, caring, determined priest. Whether we are talking about which line to join at the supermarket or whether to believe a pundit's commentary, a choice is only a choice if you know that you have it. Perhaps that boulder in your way just requires a big old hole to roll it into. Sometimes we make choices based on our gut assessment. Sometimes we make choices on well-considered evaluation. And as we look at our beliefs and understanding of all things, we sometimes have to change what we believe or hold dear. Because new information may make an old and cherished belief suspect. Of course, that only happens if we are willing to investigate, if we are willing to look for choices. Most people used to believe that the world was flat, that lead could be turned into gold, or that the Rasmussen poles were accurate. We all know of people who sold all they had and gathered at one place or another to greet the end of the world. Soon after that appointed day, they all had to make some new life choices. But even then, some of them refused to look for choices. They continued to believe that the world would soon end, so the calculations must have been off. They didn't read the book in quite the right way. Or, well, perhaps they were blinded by their need for simple answers. People sometimes choose to support a simple solution to a complex problem, only to find that they are better off looking for more choices, and some never even look for the choices. We are constrained by the idea that we only have limited choices, or that a wide range of choices only clouds the waters. Choices may mean that you have to make a decision, and decisions scare people. Hugh Means captured this attitude rather succinctly. He wrote a short poem about it, which you're going to have to suffer through right now. As I was sitting in my chair, I knew the bottom wasn't there, nor legs, nor back, but I just sat, ignoring little things like that. Some of you here this morning have faced the realization that the beliefs and practices or positions that your friends or family hold are simply not the best choice for you. I have noticed, and perhaps you have observed, that some people just don't want to let fact get in the way of belief. If a choice does not fit their view of the world, they simply deny the choice and look for any observation that supports their view, no matter how thin the support may be. Global warming comes to mind. You've probably heard people say things like, the Bible is infallible, therefore all other writ is incorrect. They made a movie about it, it must be true. It'd be that old-time religion. My brother, my mother, my father believe it, period. Now I understand this. If the choice is between belief as the family believes and being accepted and welcomed, or abandon family beliefs and risk ostracism, I think most people will choose to be welcomed. These choices of convenience, perhaps we should call them rationalized choices, will confound our spirit. But when the choice becomes unavoidable, when going through the motions just won't do anymore, there is a price to be paid. When that day arrives, when you see a respected member of your family or an influential person in your life in a whole new light, it can bruise you. It can bruise your being. This happened to me the first time when I was in high school. My most revered teacher showed a side of himself that cut deep into my belief. He had, up until that day, always taught the need to base decisions on fact. Believe nothing you hear, he would say. Believe half of what you read. He admonished us to seek the truth, to accept nothing until it was proved. But one day he said to a few of us students, and I paraphrase, I believe that the world was created in 6 24-hour days. I know what the sciences have shown, but I believe this nonetheless. He had abandoned fact for religious belief. He had rationalized his truth. This teacher, who was the core of my religious upbringing, sowed the seed of doubt in me that day. That was the day I began to look for more choices in my own beliefs. Now, on the other hand, isn't that exactly what teachers are supposed to do? School is a smorgasbord of ideas. The whole point of education is to broaden the student's view, to open the student's vision to the vast and complex world we inhabit. I can tell you from a teacher's point of view that it's really fun. I'm teaching Microsoft Office currently. The classes are more or less mandatory. Invariably, my students will come into class with low expectations. Most have used Office products for years. One student recently sat in class reading email while we went over some features of Excel. She would check in and out of the lecture and exercises as the features were addressed. She'd listen, then email, then listen, email, listen, email, listen. Now, I teach adults. I was going to make a comment right here, but I'll choose not to make it. Now, I have no problem with this lack of attention because I know, after doing this for a few years, that sooner or later the exercise and the lecture will kind of match up with the student's understanding of what we're covering. And sure enough, as we started working on a really cool feature, one that people would use all the time if they knew it was there, and suddenly the emailer perked up. Wait, what did you just do? So we went over it one more time, and that was a feature that she could use. It was a choice that she didn't have. Email time was over and learning time had begun. By the end of the class, she had 4 or 5 such new features in her Excel arsenal. She had more choices. She could do her job better and quicker. Now, I know Excel is not philosophy, but the principle is the same. Teachers see this every day, and we are all teachers. We all have the opportunity to give a friend or coworker or child or any other choice-challenged person a nice new choice, a tasty bit of knowledge, a slick new skill. And it's a pretty cool gift. Think about all those times you paused for a minute to show someone how to do something just a little bit better. Think about how giving a person a different point of view can change their outlook. You don't have to be a counselor or a psychologist to open a person's view to a new and interesting concept. You don't have to be an expert to give someone a skill or a bit of knowledge that they actually can use. Perhaps it will be a gift that will make them pause and make them think. Perhaps they will return the gift in kind or pass it on to another person. We all have something to contribute. We all have choices that just might be the choice that another person really, really needs. And if you look back for a moment and think about what others have given you, it may be that you can see how all those choices you have made and how all of those choices that were presented to you became you. The choices we make are us. Even when we refuse choices, they define us. The choices a country makes defines the country. The choices a state makes define the state, and so on until it comes down to each of us. Choose to be a soldier, and you are defined. Choose to teach, and you are a teacher. The teacher who so inspired me and so disappointed me, he used to say, if you write a poem, you're a poet. If you choose to look for more answers, more options, more knowledge, more questions, more understanding, more choices, then you are defining who you are. Write a poem, and you are a poet. That basement-digging neighbor chose not to let a boulder stop him. It didn't, and that defined him. My teacher is the choice he made. That priest is the choice he made. It takes courage to be who you are, to be what you believe, to look for choices knowing full well that the choices you make will ultimately become you. Your choices become who you are, and the choices you have yet to make will change who you are. As we rise in body and spirit, and join in singing our closing hymn, number 56.